Yet, even with her resolve, she sensed them before she saw them. The shift in the air, the low murmur of voices behind her, laughter devoid of warmth, edged with something colder. She didn't stop walking, didn't turn her head, but listened intently. They weren't rushing, not yet. They were watching, waiting. "Yo, look at this one," a voice muttered, young and cocky. "She's too old to be out here like this," another said, amusement lacing his tone. "Yeah," the first voice replied. Louder now for her to hear. "Lady, you shouldn't be walking around alone." Regina kept moving. She'd encountered boys like these before, in classrooms full of bravado, boys who hadn't yet learned that true strength wasn't in how loudly you spoke, but in how well you carried yourself. She had faced worse. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said evenly, without breaking stride. One of them laughed. "Trouble's looking for you." Still, she didn't turn, though she felt them closing in. Tightening her grip on her pee. Tightening her grip on her pee. Yet even with her resolve, she sensed them before she saw them. The shift in the air, the low murmur of voices behind her, laughter devoid of warmth, edged with something colder. She didn't stop walking, didn't turn her head, but listened intently. They weren't rushing, not yet. They were watching, waiting. "Yo, look at this one," a voice muttered, young and cocky. "She's too old to be out here like this," another said, amusement lacing his tone. "Yeah," the first voice replied. Louder now for her to hear. "Lady, you shouldn't be walking around alone." Regina kept moving. She'd encountered boys like these before, in classrooms full of bravado, boys who hadn't yet learned that true strength wasn't in how loudly you spoke, but in how well you carried yourself. She had faced worse. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said evenly, without breaking stride. One of them laughed. "Trouble's looking for you." Still, she didn't turn, though she felt them closing in, tightening her grip on her pee. Sê exemplo vivo de virtude, pois é através das tuas ações que aqueles que se perderam no pecado encontrarão o caminho de volta à retidão e ao perdão divino. Não permitas que os prazeres passageiros ou as tentações deste mundo te desviem do propósito eterno ao qual foste chamado. A verdadeira plenitude não está nas riquezas materiais nem nos confortos efêmeros, mas no amor desinteressado, na compaixão genuína e na entrega aos outros. Sê porto seguro para os sofredores. Estende bondade aos necessitados e oferece consolo àqueles que vivem na solidão. Torna-te uma luz brilhante que ilumina o caminho daqueles que vagueiam perdidos nas sombras da vida. Diante de um futuro incerto, enfrenta-o com coragem. O teu amor por Deus e a tua fé inabalável serão a bússola que te guiará através das tempestades mais violentas. Mesmo nos momentos mais sombrios, nunca estarás só, pois o meu coração maternal estará contigo, envolvendo-te em proteção e consolo, assim como as estrelas continuam a brilhar. "Don't be stupid, lady," he muttered, his voice stripped of amusement as he yanked harder. Regina braced herself, planting her feet, tightening her grip, but it was futile. The strap cut into her skin, burning as she strained to hold on. Her nails dug into the leather, but youth overpowered age. With one final vicious tug, he wrenched it free, sending her staggering backward. A shove from behind knocked her to the ground, knees scraping against rough pavement. Pain exploded through her hip and shoulder as she hit the concrete. Laughter ringing cruelly around her. Thought she could fight back, one sneered, shaking his head. Regina pressed her palms against the ground, breath sharp and uneven. But she didn't cry out or beg. When she tried to rise, a kick to her ribs sent her sprawling again. Another landed against her shoulder, jolting through her like an electric shock. Still, they laughed, their voices cold and distant, past the ringing in her ears. Then came a pause, a whistle of a prey. They had no idea what they had unleashed. At her front door, James unlocked it for her, his frustration evident. "Miss Hawthorne, you need to let me do something. You shouldn't be alone right now." Regina steadied herself against the back of her chair, forcing a weary smile. "I've been alone before, James. This won't be the thing that breaks me." He stood there, lips pressed into a hard line, fingers flexing at his sides. Younger than her by decades, he remembered when the neighborhood had been different, when porches were lively late into the night, when mothers weren't afraid for their children. Like her, he hated what the city had become. "Call someone," he urged. "You've got family." Regina's fingers tightened around the wooden frame of the chair. She noticed the fleeting shadow of relief that softened his features, but it was clear he didn't grasp the weight of her words. He likely imagined she'd reach out to a daughter, or perhaps an old friend from church, or even a sibling. Regina settled into her chair, her movements deliberate, as if bracing herself for what was to come. She reached for the phone, with fingers that had steadied despite the throbbing ache in her hand. This call, this number still saved in her phone, after all these years, was one she'd never wanted to make. It wasn't pride that kept her from dialing it before. She'd always prided herself on solving her own problems, fighting her own battles. And she'd raised her son to do the same. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about survival, about what came next. The line rang twice, and then a voice answered. Deep, measured, familiar. The same voice she'd known since the day he drew his first breath. Regina inhaled slowly, letting the sound of his voice wash over her like balm against the raw edges of the evening's wounds. He didn't sound rushed or worried. No, he sounded exactly as he always did. Controlled, steady. "Waiting. Zion," she said softly, using the name only she still called high. "Zion, please. I'm coming home, Ma." Her eyes slid shut, and she exhaled slowly, letting the finality of those words settle deep in her chest. There was no stopping him now, no pleading, no convincing him otherwise. And maybe part of her didn't want to. Her son had spent his life fighting for others, for causes greater than himself, for people who might never know his name. Yet the one battle he'd never fought for was this city, this family, this home. Now that fight had found him. "Stay safe, Ma," he said, his voice still calm, still controlled. "I'll be there soon." And then the line went dead. Regina placed the phone back on the table, her fingers lingering against its cool surface for a moment, before her gaze drifted to the photo of David. She sighed, shaking her head. "Lord help us," she whispered to the empty room. She knew what was coming. And she knew those boys, the ones too young, too reckless, too blind to understand the firestorm they had ignited, had no idea. "Yeah," Zion replied evenly. "So I've heard." The rest of the ride passed in silence, but the city spoke to him in ways words never could. Storefronts tagged with symbols meant to intimidate. Sidewalks lined with men who weren't standing there just to pass time. Fear woven into the fabric of daily life, the way people moved, the way their eyes darted away too quickly, The way conversations cut short at the approach of unfamiliar faces. When they finally pulled up in front of his mother's house, the driver hesitated before speaking again. "You be careful out here," he said, his voice low, serious. "This ain't the same city you left." Zion met his gaze in the rearview mirror, holding it for a beat before nodding once. "Appreciate the ride." He stepped out, adjusting the strap of his duffel bag over his shoulder. The second his feet hit the pavement, he felt it, the weight of unseen eyes boring into him. An old woman sat on the porch across the street, clutching a newspaper, her lie. His mother didn't bend, not for anyone, not even him. Still, the thought of her walking into danger made his stomach twist with unease. "They'll come," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Once they see you wearing that necklace, they'll circle like vultures." Regina turned to face him, her expression calm but sharp. "Good," she replied simply. "Let them." He stopped pacing then, crossing his arms over his broad frame as he studied her. There was so much of himself in her, the same stubbornness, the same refusal to back down, but it was tempered by years of wisdom and experience. She wasn't reckless, she was calculated. And yet, none of that eased the tension coiled tight in his shoulders. "You're sure about this?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Her smile was faint, almost wistful. "I raised you to stand up when others wouldn't. Did you think I'd let myself be any different?" Zion exhaled sharply through his nose, shaking his head. "You could have at least warned me." Thank you for listening. I'm very sorry for any disturbance there, but I always appreciate seeing some films come from Moscow. There is someone more you could have told me. You could have at least warned me. You could have at least warned me. There was so much of himself in her. The same stubbornness, the same refusal to back down. But it was tempered by years of wisdom and experience. She wasn't reckless, she was calculated. And yet, none of that eased the tension coiled tight in his shoulders, even though things seemed to be smoothing. Alinhe seus objetivos com a vontade de Deus, buscando fazer uma diferença positiva onde quer que esteja. Compartilhe a mensagem, incentive outros a abraçarem essa visão de esperança e renovação. Compartilhe suas percepções, testemunhos e experiências para inspirar e elevar aqueles ao seu redor. Reflexão final. A visão transmitida por Ivan e Padre Michel Rodrigue não é apenas um vislumbre do que poderia ser, é um roteiro para o que deve ser. Ela nos desafia a superar o medo, a divisão e a apatia, convidando-nos a caminhar com ousadia na fé, amor e propósito. Enquanto navegamos pelas complexidades da vida moderna, apeguemo-nos à certeza de que a luz de Cristo nunca se apagará. Com corações abertos e resolução firme, podemos nos tornar agentes de mudança, brilhando intensamente em um mundo sedento de esperança e cura. Possamos atender a esse chamado divino à conversão, paz e reconciliação, confiantes de que a graça de Deus nos sustentará a cada passo do caminho. The leader stumbled backward, his bravado slipping through his fingers like water. He'd seen street fights before, thrown punches, tasted both victory and defeat. But this was different. Zion didn't fight like someone from these streets. His movements carried the weight of experience far beyond alleyway brawls. He fought as though he'd walked through war zones, places where men died silently, and violence wasn't about dominance, but survival. The realization hit the gang leader too late. Before he could react, Zion closed the distance between them in one brutal stride. With terrifying ease, Zion's hand shot out, gripping the front of the leader's hoodie and yanking him forward. Before the man could draw breath, his back collided with the nearest brick wall, forcing a strangled cry from his throat. Zion held him there, ironclad, his breathing calm, almost serene. "You touched my mother," Zion said, his voice so quiet it was more menacing than any scream. The gang leader twitched, hands claw. Without hesitation, Zion caught it mid-fall and drove its end into the side of the attacker's knee. The man buckled instantly. Spinning sharply, Zion swung the pipe in a wide arc, striking another assailant across the ribs and sending him sprawling against the alley wall with a heavy thud. Just like that, it was over. Groans filled the alley as broken bodies writhed on the pavement. Men who once believed themselves untouchable, now reduced to cautionary tales. The gang leader, still on his knees, struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Lifting his head, his face twisted in pain and dawning realization, he met Zion's unreadable expression. Crouching down in front of him, Zion spoke in a low, steady voice, devoid of emotion, but heavy with certainty. "You're going to talk." The gang leader shook his head weakly, lips parting, but no words came. He still clung to the hope of escape. Zion didn't hesitate. Grabbing the man's already bruised hand, he wrapped his fingers around the small. A vitória definitiva da justiça sobre o mal é tema central nas mensagens de La Salette. E essas revelações proféticas não apenas alertam sobre possíveis ameaças, mas também oferecem uma orientação espiritual indispensável para enfrentar os desafios que estão por vir. O chamado de Nossa Senhora à penitência, conversão e oração ressoa como um grito claro dirigido a todos os fiéis, instando-os a se prepararem para tempos difíceis no horizonte. Suas palavras ganham especial relevância em um mundo onde muitos enfrentam uma crise de fé e onde a Igreja lida com críticas internas e externas. A mensagem de La Salette defende uma renovação tanto individual quanto coletiva, enfatizando a necessidade de retornar a uma fé mais pura e autêntica. Esse processo começa com um compromisso profundo com os princípios fundamentais do cristianismo: obediência aos mandamentos de Deus, oração diária e conversão pessoal. A Virgem Maria encoraja os fiéis a refletirem não apenas sobre seus próprios caminhos. Esta mensagem de esperança em meio à tribulação ressoa profundamente no mundo atual, onde tantos enfrentam crises pessoais e coletivas. É um chamado espiritual ao despertar, um convite a nos afastarmos das distrações da vida moderna e a reconectar-nos com o nosso Criador, que promete misericórdia e redenção para todos aqueles que o buscam com sinceridade. Para a Igreja, essa profecia é um lembrete de seu papel crucial em guiar os fiéis através desses tempos desafiadores. O Vaticano e o Papa estão em estado de máxima atenção, não apenas para responder ao crescente caos global, mas também para preparar os crentes para os desafios espirituais que se aproximam. A missão da Igreja é clara: conduzir a humanidade por um tempo de purificação rumo a uma nova era de fé, onde a luz de Cristo brilhará mais radiante do que nunca. A maior batalha espiritual que a humanidade enfrenta hoje não é travada com poder militar ou influência política, mas sim no campo da alma. Estamos presos entre as forças do "o tempo está se esgotando" e a urgência é inegável. Devemos agir agora, pois apenas aqueles que abraçarem este chamado estarão preparados para o que está por vir. A profecia fala de um evento extraordinário, um período de 72 horas de densa escuridão, quando a terra será envolta em sombras profundas. Nesse momento, apenas os que permanecerem firmes em sua fé, estiverem espiritualmente preparados e tiverem vivido com amor verdadeiro, testemunharão o amanhecer de uma nova era, o renascimento. Contudo, somente aqueles que ouvirem e obedecerem a esta advertência terão forças para enfrentar os desafios que aguardam. O desafio é real. Embora o medo tente tomar conta de nossos corações, devemos resistir. Deus nos deu a força necessária para suportar as provas que estão chegando, e é por meio da oração, da reflexão e da humildade que sobreviveremos e sairemos ainda mais fortes. Este não é o momento de nos escondermos da verdade, mas sim de encará-la com coragem. Uma nova era está prestes a chegar. It didn't matter. He'd endured worse. You talk too much, he muttered, adjusting his stance, waiting. Men like Dom didn't fall easily. This wouldn't end with a single decisive blow. It would be a war fought inch by inch, blow by blow, between two forces unwilling to yield. Dom laughed, low and menacing, then lunged. His first punch came like a thunderclap, raw power meant to obliterate any resistance instantly. But Zion slipped just beyond its reach. Countering with a sharp jab aimed at Dom's liver, a test more than an attack. Dom barely flinched. The next swing came faster, forcing Zion back as Dom pressed forward relentlessly, his sheer size and strength turning him into a human battering ram. Yet Zion held his ground, knowing that legends weren't built in comfort. They were forged in fire. And tonight, the flames belonged to him. Zion shifted with precision, patience etched into every movement as he waited, watched, and allowed Dom to exhaust himself in his fury. But even the sharpest minds falter. A fleeting half-second delay was all it took. Dom's fist found its mark, slamming into Zion's ribs with enough force to send a searing shockwave of agony coursing through him, stealing his breath and forcing him to stumble. The air left his lungs in a rush, but Dom wasted no time. Spotting the opening, he seized Zion by the collar and hurled him against a metal crate. The impact reverberated through Zion's spine, his vision flickering at the edges like a dying flame. For the first time in years, Zion felt the raw, unrelenting weight of a true fight pressing down on him. Dom grinned, licking blood from his split lip as he advanced again, swinging punches with the swagger of a man convinced victory was already his. Yet Zion remained calm, letting Dom close the distance, waiting for that moment of overcommitment. No phone records, no digital footprint, nothing. The only reason we know she exists is because bodies tend to drop wherever she's been. He flicked ash out the window, his tone heavy with resignation. But Zion wasn't listening anymore. His focus was locked on the faint trail Lena had left behind, a trail he intended to follow straight to Viktor Novak himself against the railing, a rhythm that seemed almost mocking. 4 men fanned out around him, their guns steady, their eyes sharp. These weren't amateurs. They were precision instruments, honed for violence and control. Novak's elite enforcers. And above them all, Lena Vasquez loomed like a spider at the center of her web. Zion's mind raced, dissecting every variable. The distance to each man, the angles of fire, the structural integrity of the catwalk above. He didn't need to look behind him to know there was no clear exit, not without tearing through steel or flesh. The air was thick with tension, electric with anticipation. You came Aviso urgente, a mensagem alarmante da Virgem Maria que pode salvar sua vida. Que a paz de Cristo esteja com todos vocês neste momento crucial. Estamos vivendo em tempos de grande agitação, onde as fundações do mundo começam a tremer diante de uma ameaça que paira sobre a humanidade. Um futuro sombrio se aproxima, carregado por uma nuvem densa de destruição e caos. Esta não é apenas uma advertência profética, é um chamado divino urgente para despertar. O que está por vir não é uma simples crise ou catástrofe física. É uma força devastadora que testará nossas almas e abalará nossa fé até o âmago. Como disse a Virgem Maria em suas revelações, estamos sendo chamados a nos preparar espiritualmente e fisicamente para enfrentar uma provação sem precedentes. Não há tempo a perder. O relógio está correndo, e o destino de cada um de nós depende de como responderemos a este aviso. O caos está próximo. Imagine um mundo em colapso. Ruas tomadas pelo medo, hospitais lotados, pessoas desparece espiritualmente e fisicamente. Este não é um chamado para o medo, mas para a ação. A Virgem Maria oferece sua proteção àqueles que confiam nela e seguem suas orientações. Invista na sua salvação espiritual e garanta que sua casa seja um refúgio seguro contra a escuridão. Ore com sinceridade, reze o rosário diariamente e busque fortalecer sua conexão com Deus. Seja um farol de luz para os outros. Especialmente para aqueles que ainda não perceberam a gravidade do momento. Lembre-se, você foi escolhido para receber esta mensagem por uma razão. Não a ignore. O tempo urge e a nuvem de destruição está cada vez mais próxima. Aqueles que permanecerem cegos para os sinais serão surpreendidos despreparados. Mas você tem a oportunidade de fazer diferente. Use-a sabiamente. Uma batalha entre luz e trevas. Esta é uma guerra entre luz e trevas, entre fé e desespero. Aqueles que caminham na luz, firmes em sua fé, vencerão. Aqueles que se deixarem levar pelo medo e pela dúvida. Around them, the warehouse groaned under the weight of the fire, its structure beginning to collapse. Beams cracked and splintered overhead, raining embers onto the battlefield below. The air grew thicker, hotter, suffocating, but neither fighter paid it any mind. They circled each other, two apex predators sizing up their prey. Zion's mind raced, analyzing every move she'd made so far, every pattern she might follow. She was fast, yes, but speed alone wouldn't win this fight. He had strength, endurance, and experience on his side. What he lacked in finesse, he made up for in raw determination. And then, without warning, Lena struck again. This time, there was no hesitation, no testing of defenses. Her attacks came on rapid succession, a blur of steel and motion. Each strike forced Zion to give ground, retreating step by step, until his back hit a crumbling wall. Trapped, he braced himself for the final blow, but instead of pressing her advantage, Lena paused, her blade hovering inches earth. A tempestade está no horizonte. Obrigado por fazer parte desta jornada. Sua presença e participação nesta investigação dão ainda mais significado ao que estamos vivendo. Que as histórias compartilhadas de nossa experiência humana continuem a inspirar e elevar você até que nos encontremos novamente. Em Akita, profetizou as divisões que ameaçariam a unidade da igreja. E em La Salette, alertou sobre corrupções dentro da própria igreja. Esses eventos não foram isolados, fazem parte de um chamado contínuo e amoroso para que voltemos nossos corações a Deus. A convergência das mensagens da Virgem com as previsões de Edgar Cayce, o vidente americano, oferece maior clareza sobre os desafios que nos esperam. Cayce previu uma agitação global, incluindo catástrofes naturais, como o aumento do nível do mar, novas formações terrestres e mudanças no equilíbrio de poder mundial. Ele também apontou para uma transformação na liderança global, destacando a ascensão da China como um ator central em uma revitalização cristã. Embora nem todas as suas previsões tenham se concretizado, a ressonância entre seus escritos e os alertas da Virgem Maria enfatiza a urgência do momento atual. Em sua mensagem recente ao mundo, a Virgem Maria fala tanto como profetisa quanto como mãe. Ela nos convoca à ação com V. Novak had her, Regina Hawthorne, the one person in this world Zion would burn entire cities to protect. For all his skill, for all his precision, this wasn't merely about dismantling an empire anymore. This was personal. Novak thought he had played his ultimate card, believed this was checkmate. He was wrong. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the night. But Zion didn't relax. He recognized the pattern of the approaching vehicles, not ordinary police, but those who only came when ordered. Novak's orders. Zion barely had time to melt back into the shadows before two blacked-out squad cars screeched to a halt outside the burning warehouse. Figures emerged, their movements controlled, their presence heavier than mere law enforcement. These weren't cops investigating a crime scene. They were cleaners, here to erase evidence of Novak's mess. Among them stood someone different. Not rushed, not cautious, but confident. As provações que virão não são o fim. A Virgem nos lembra gentilmente, mas o início de um renascimento espiritual. Sua fé será testada, mas será através desse teste que sua força crescerá. Permaneçam firmes e unidos em oração, pois através da união vocês vencerão. União é o tema central da mensagem da Virgem. Um mundo dividido politicamente, economicamente e ideologicamente enfrentará desafios insuperáveis individualmente. Por isso, ela clama a todos os fiéis que coloquem de lado as divisões e se unam. Somente em solidariedade, através da oração coletiva e apoio mútuo, conseguiremos resistir. O inimigo busca dividir-vos, adverte a Virgem Maria. Mas lembrem-se, unidos, vocês são mais fortes. Permaneçam juntos na fé, e as forças das trevas não prevalecerão. Essencial para essa união é o Santo Rosário. A Virgem enfatiza o poder da oração comunitária, especialmente a recitação do Rosário. Como uma maneira de construir resiliência espiritual, ela chama os crentes a se reunir. Malik smirked faintly, though there was no humor in it. Just resignation. Good, because dying won't save her. With that, Zion turned and walked out of the garage, the door creaking shut behind him. Outside, the rain fell steadily, washing away his footprints as though erasing any evidence he'd ever been there. He moved with purpose now, each step bringing him closer to the edge of the abyss. Ahead lay danger, violence, and uncertainty, but none of it mattered. Not anymore. Novak thought he was untouchable, a king ruling over his empire with impunity. But kings fell too, and Zion had every intention of pulling him off his throne, one shattered illusion at a time. The drive contained everything Zion needed: blueprints, security rotations, personnel lists, all meticulously compiled. He glanced at it one last time before slipping it into his pocket, the weight of its contents settling over him like an unshakable burden. This wasn't just about taking down Novak anymore. This was about Dissam. Sua mensagem é clara. Devemos nos tornar pacificadores, agindo como instrumentos da graça e do amor de Deus para curar um mundo que desesperadamente precisa de renovação espiritual. No centro dessa mensagem está a Eucaristia, o sagrado corpo e sangue de Cristo, dado a nós como alimento espiritual. A Virgem Maria exorta os fiéis a priorizarem a Eucaristia, aproximando-se de Cristo através da Santa Comunhão com fé e devoção. Ao fazer isso, os cristãos receberão a força e a coragem necessárias para enfrentar as provações e tribulações que estão por vir. A Eucaristia não é apenas um sacramento, mas uma fonte de poder espiritual que fortalece a alma, capacitando os crentes a levar a luz de Cristo às trevas do mundo. O pedido de Maria por um engajamento mais profundo e significativo com a Eucaristia vai além de um simples ato físico. É um chamado para abraçar uma vida sacramental, permitir que a graça da Eucaristia molde nosso ser e guie nossas ações. Nestes tempos conturbados, viver uma. With relentless focus, Zion moved swiftly, clearing 2 more rooms with brutal efficiency. His body operated on instinct, each motion precise. His mind a machine fine-tuned for destruction. The deeper he ventured, the fiercer the resistance became, until finally he reached the grand staircase leading to the upper floors, where Regina was being held. But as he took his first step upward, the unmistakable sound of reinforced boots echoed through the corridor. The synchronized march of trained killers sent a chill down his spine. Then came the flashbang, a blinding explosion of light and deafening noise that tore through the air, disorienting him completely. Shockwaves reverberated through his skull, fracturing his vision and leaving his ears ringing. Before he could fully recover, the first strike landed, a crushing boot to his chest that sent him slamming back into the concrete wall. Pain shot through his ribs. But he rolled with the impact, forcing himself to move before the next blow see.